Welcome to my channel. Today's story takes us far beyond the known edges of the galaxy, to a world where reason met emotion for the very first time. It began aboard the Elorian vessel Kareth, a sleek craft gliding through the dark silence of space. Its crew made up of the galaxy's most advanced researchers. The Elorians were beings of pure intellect, cold, logical, detached. To them, emotion was a primitive flaw, something humanity had long since been judged for by the Galactic Council. But everything changed the day they brought a single human aboard for study. His name was Commander Ethan Voss, a Terran envoy sent to represent Earth during an interspecies diplomacy experiment. To the Elorians, he was an oddity, a creature ruled by feelings, unpredictable and impulsive. To Ethan, they were machines wrapped in skin, incapable of understanding warmth. Yet somewhere in the middle of their silent observation and his human heartbeat, something extraordinary began to stir. Dr. Lyra Thane, the lead xenobiologist on the vessel, was assigned to study him. She was tall, pale as moonlight, her eyes like polished glass, beautiful in a way that felt sculpted, deliberate, and entirely alien. Her people communicated through subtle expressions of light that shimmered beneath their skin, a visual language that Ethan could barely read. At first, she treated him like a specimen. Every morning, she asked him questions about his biology, his culture, his emotions. Her tone was clinical, her posture rigid. But there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where her curiosity slipped past the veneer of professionalism. One day, when Ethan laughed at a joke she didn't understand, she tilted her head, confused. "You find this pleasant?" she asked. "Laughter is an emotional discharge, correct? What purpose does it serve?" Ethan smiled, still chuckling. "It serves no purpose," he said. "It just feels good." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, a spark she didn't yet recognize. Weeks passed, and the experiments continued. The Elorians observed everything: his reactions to music, his responses to art, the way his heart rate changed when he looked at pictures of Earth. They called these things emotional triggers. To them, it was data. To him, it was life. And through it all, Lyra watched. She began to notice things her instruments didn't record. The way his breath caught when he saw the stars, the softness in his eyes when he spoke of his family, the quiet strength in his voice when he said, "We may not be perfect, but we feel. That's what makes us human." Those words stayed with her long after he left the lab each day. She would replay his voice in her mind, the way it trembled slightly when he spoke of home, the way warmth radiated from him even in the coldest corners of the ship. She began to feel something. It was not part of her programming. It was not logical, but it was real. Then came the day everything changed. During a gravitational field experiment, Ethan was exposed to a surge of energy that disrupted the ship's systems. The lights flickered, alarms blared, and for the first time in her existence, Lyra felt something she could not quantify: fear. She rushed to the chamber where he lay unconscious, his body limp and pale. Her colleagues were shouting orders, running diagnostics, arguing over containment procedures. But she couldn't hear them. She only saw him, the human whose laughter had once confused her, whose words had lingered in her thoughts like a song she couldn't forget. She reached out, trembling, her hand resting on his chest. The heat beneath her palm startled her. The rhythmic pulse of his heart was unlike anything she'd ever felt. And then, to her shock, her own body reacted. The luminous lines beneath her skin flared bright, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. The other scientists gasped, their voices a chorus of disbelief. "Dr. Thane, what's happening?" one asked. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. For the first time, she felt him, his pain, his fear, his strength, all of it. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, she was still there, sitting beside him in silence. "You stayed," he said weakly. She looked at him, her eyes softer than before. "Your life signs were unstable," she replied mechanically, but her voice betrayed something else, something fragile. "I didn't want you to stop." He smiled faintly. "You mean die?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that." There was a pause, and then she asked, almost shyly, When you look at me, your body temperature rises. Your heartbeat changes. Why does that happen? Ethan chuckled softly, though his voice was still weak. Because you make me nervous, he said. Because you're beautiful. The words seemed to stun her. Beautiful? She repeated quietly, as if testing its meaning. It is a human term for aesthetic pleasure? He nodded. It's more than that, he said. It means you make someone feel something. Something warm. Something they can't explain. She looked away, her luminous skin dimming slightly. I do not understand, she said. No, Ethan murmured. You don't. Not yet. From that moment on, the distance between them began to fade. Their sessions grew longer, their conversations deeper. She asked questions that went beyond biology, about love, loss, and the things humans would die to protect. And Ethan answered honestly, sometimes with humor, sometimes with pain. He told her about wars, about art, about the way humans could destroy themselves and still find the strength to rebuild. We're fragile, he said one day. But that's what makes us strong. We know everything ends, and still we keep loving. Lyra found herself drawn to those words. Late at night, when the ship was quiet, she would replay their conversations and wonder why her body reacted the way it did when he smiled. Her pulse quickened when he was near. Her temperature rose when he laughed. Her chest tightened when he said her name. These were not logical responses. They were human ones, and that terrified her. Eventually, her behavior drew the attention of the other scientists. You've compromised the experiment, her superior said coldly. Your emotional contamination renders your data invalid. They ordered her to distance herself from the human, to terminate all physical interaction. But she couldn't, not after what she'd felt. When she refused, they made the decision for her. Ethan was to be transferred to another vessel, his cooperation reevaluated by the council. The announcement hit her like a physical blow. That night, she found him standing by the observation window, staring at the stars. They're sending me away, he said softly. I know, she whispered. I tried to stop them. He turned to her, his face a mixture of sadness and resolve. Then come with me, he said. She blinked, startled. That's impossible. I have no place among humans. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. You already do. For a long time, she said nothing. The stars outside reflected in her glass-like eyes. My people will see it as betrayal, she whispered. They'll destroy me. Ethan reached out and took her hand. Her skin was cool, smooth, and faintly glowing beneath his touch. Then let them try, he said. Because for the first time, I think you understand what it means to be alive. The space between them vanished. For a moment, she let go of logic, of duty, of everything her species had taught her, and leaned forward until her forehead touched his. Her skin shimmered with waves of light, and his heart responded in kind. In that quiet, wordless connection, two beings from different worlds understood each other completely. The universe outside went on, indifferent and vast, but inside that ship, something ancient and profound had been reborn. The bridge between emotion and reason, between humanity and the cold perfection of the stars. When the council's ships came for him the next morning, she was gone. Her lab had been dismantled, her files erased. But as Ethan was escorted onto the transport vessel, he noticed something on his wrist. A faint trace of light that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath his skin. He smiled. A secret only he would ever know. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the council, she was free. And though they would never see each other again, he could still feel her presence. Warm, curious, alive. Woven into every thought. Across the galaxy, the Elorian High Command reported a strange anomaly spreading through their network. Sudden bursts of emotion among their kind, unexplainable and contagious. Some called it corruption. Others called it evolution. But those who remembered Dr. Lyra Thane whispered another word, humanity. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi Tales, where humanity's heart still beats among the stars. The next morning, the sterile hum of the Elorian vessel filled the silence like a distant heartbeat, and Ethan woke to find Dr. Lyra already waiting for him in the observation chamber. The room was bathed in a pale silver glow, its walls lined with holographic displays mapping every physiological detail of his body. She stood before them, motionless, her hands clasped behind her back as the data floated in the air like mist. "Your heart rate was elevated during sleep," she said, her voice calm, almost melodic. "Was it a dream?" Ethan rubbed his eyes, groaning softly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the idea of being studied like a bug under a microscope." Her eyes flickered, a faint, involuntary pulse of blue beneath her skin, the Elorian equivalent of curiosity. "You find the process uncomfortable?" He smirked. "Let's just say humans aren't used to being scanned 24/7 by glowing aliens with zero sense of humor." She tilted her head slightly, the gesture precise and alien. "You attempt humor again," she said. "Is this another emotional release?" He chuckled, the sound low and easy. "You could say that. It's how we survive discomfort. We laugh instead of break." Her expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, an unspoken awareness that lingered between them. She approached the examination console, and for a moment, their reflections met on the glass surface between them. "Fascinating," she murmured. "You use emotion as a defense mechanism. It makes your species unpredictable." Ethan leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed. "Or maybe it makes us adaptable. You can't calculate everything, Doctor. Some things you just have to feel." Her gaze lingered on him, as if she were trying to decode the meaning behind the word feel. She turned away, clearly unsettled by the thought. "Feelings are inefficient," she said softly, almost as if repeating something she had been taught since birth. "They create imbalance." "And yet," Ethan replied gently, "you're still here studying them." She paused at that, her luminous eyes glancing back toward him, her mouth parting as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she simply adjusted the monitor and began recording again, but her movements were slower this time, hesitant, as though she were questioning her own logic for the first time. The days stretched into weeks, and somewhere between her analysis and his sarcasm, something delicate began to grow, a rhythm neither of them intended. Lyra began visiting the observation deck more often, long after the official studies ended. She told herself it was for further data, but the truth sat heavy in the stillness between them. They would sit in silence, watching the stars slide past the viewport. One night, she asked in a quiet voice, "What is it like to live on a world where the sky moves?" He looked at her, surprised. "You've never seen a sunrise?" She shook her head slowly. "Our planet is locked in orbit. One side always faces the sun, the other sleeps in endless dark. We have light and shadow, but never both." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then you've never seen rain either." The word puzzled her. "Rain? Water falling from the sky?" he said, smiling softly. "It sounds like a billion whispers. Feels like cool silver on your skin. It brings life." She fell silent, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Your description produces an emotional response," she said finally. "A warmth in my chest I cannot explain." Ethan chuckled quietly. "That's what humans call longing, Doctor. Missing something you've never had." That night, she stayed longer than usual, pretending to review his neural readings even after he'd fallen asleep in the reclining chair. She watched his chest rise and fall, steady and slow, and felt something strange. An ache she couldn't categorize, a flicker of light beneath her skin that wouldn't fade. It was as though his presence affected the energy that flowed through her, altering it in ways no algorithm could predict. The next morning, she didn't log the anomaly. She couldn't bring herself to explain it. Instead, she sat alone in her quarters, watching the faint shimmer of her reflection in the glass. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with something dangerously close to fear. The walls didn't answer, but deep inside, she already knew. The council's orders were clear: observe the human, catalog his behaviors, and extract emotional data to aid in their long-standing studies of psychological control. Humanity was useful to the Galactic Council, yes, but also feared. Their unpredictable nature, their ability to act on emotion rather than reason, had made them dangerous in the eyes of logic-driven species. Lyra had read the reports, how human soldiers had fought against impossible odds, how they'd refused surrender even when logic dictated defeat. She had studied their resilience as one studies a virus. Fascinating, potent, contagious. But none of those reports prepared her for the real thing. Ethan wasn't violent or reckless. He wasn't desperate. He was alive. Every word he spoke seemed to vibrate with emotion. Every glance carried meaning. Every smile felt like light in the cold corridors of her world. And that light was spreading. The ship's crew began to notice changes in her. Her tone softened. Her pulse flickered with irregular warmth during her shifts. Some whispered that she had grown too close to the specimen. Others reported her to command, suggesting reevaluation of her assignment. But the council never interfered immediately. They wanted data, and if emotional contamination could be measured, she would become part of their experiment too. Unaware of the whispers, she continued her research with a strange sense of devotion. She no longer saw him as a test subject. She saw him as something else, a window into a world that defied her understanding. And when he looked at her with those steady, unguarded human eyes, she felt something in herself shift irreversibly. One evening, while reviewing his psychological logs, she found an entry she hadn't written. Ethan had discovered her personal terminal and left a message, a recording of his voice, warm and teasing. "You know, Doctor," it began, "you spend so much time studying what I feel. I think you forgot what you feel." His voice was calm but carried something gentle, something that reached through her defenses. "Maybe that's why your skin glows when you get close. Maybe your body's trying to tell you something your brain can't." The message ended with a quiet chuckle, followed by silence. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then, for the first time in her existence, she smiled. It was small, uncertain, and almost imperceptible, but it was real. She saved the message instead of deleting it. That night, when she powered down the lights, she whispered into the darkness, "Maybe I'm starting to understand." The next day, she walked into the lab without her usual detachment. When Ethan greeted her, she didn't respond with cold professionalism. Instead, she simply said, "Good morning." The words came out awkwardly, as though unused to warmth. He grinned. "Good morning, Doctor." And for the first time, she realized she liked the sound of it. As the day went on, their conversation flowed more freely. He told her about rain again, about oceans, about sunsets that bled gold and crimson. She listened, eyes wide, recording none of it because she didn't want data. She wanted to see it. By the end of the session, when he laughed at something trivial, she found herself laughing too. A soft, musical sound that startled them both. The monitors picked up the shift in her vitals instantly, logging spikes in energy that could only be described as emotional resonance. But she didn't care. For that brief moment, logic was irrelevant. She felt human. That evening, alone in her quarters, she played his message once more before sleep. His voice filled the silence, steady and familiar. When it ended, she closed her eyes, whispering, "Ethan." The name felt strange on her tongue, forbidden yet comforting. Outside, the stars drifted by in endless quiet, unaware that somewhere in the heart of the Galactic Council's most sterile ship, an alien scientist was beginning to feel the very thing her species feared most: love. The following days aboard the Kareth blurred into one long, quiet symphony of tension and curiosity that neither of them dared to name. The sterile hallways, once cold and unfeeling, now seemed to hum with a low warmth that only one of them could explain. Lyra found herself lingering near the human research chamber even when her tasks were complete, inventing reasons to extend her time there. An adjustment to his environmental controls, a recalibration of his neural sensors, a routine analysis of his heart rate. But beneath every excuse, there was an unspoken truth. She didn't want to leave him. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air like background music, and the faint rhythm of his breathing had begun to replace it in her mind. It was irrational, of course. Ilorians didn't feel attachment. Their civilization had spent millennia evolving past the need for it. They thrived on logic, built on precision, and rejected all that could not be measured. Yet here she was, standing at the edge of reason, staring at the human who smiled at her as though she were something more than an equation. That evening, while monitoring Ethan's vitals, she noticed something strange. The readings changed every time she approached. His pulse quickened, his temperature rose slightly, and his brain activity spiked in regions associated with emotion. At first, she assumed it was coincidence or perhaps stress. But when she stepped back, the readings normalized. Step forward again, and they changed once more. The pattern repeated perfectly. She recorded the data but hesitated before submitting it to the central archive. For the first time, she didn't want to share what she'd found. When she looked at him, sitting calmly in the chair with that easy, half-smile that humans seem to wear even in discomfort, she asked softly, "Why does your physiology respond this way when I am near?" Ethan tilted his head, smirking. "You really want to know?" She nodded, her glowing eyes unwavering. "It's because you make me nervous," he said simply. "Humans have a funny way of reacting when someone interesting gets too close." Her brows furrowed. "Interesting?" "Yeah," he said. "It means I can't stop thinking about you." Her pulse shimmered faintly beneath her skin, betraying the reaction she couldn't understand. "That's illogical," she murmured. "You've barely known me a few weeks." Ethan grinned. "That's emotion for you. It doesn't ask for permission." That night she couldn't sleep. The luminescent veins beneath her skin pulsed faintly in the dark, and her mind replayed his words like a recording loop she couldn't delete. "You make me nervous." The phrase echoed through her until she began to feel something she had no definition for. A strange fluttering sensation in her chest, almost like the trembling of distant thunder. She tried meditating to suppress it, but it grew stronger with every thought of him. Finally, in a moment of weakness or perhaps curiosity, she opened her data logs and began writing. But what she wrote was not a report. It was a confession disguised as observation. Human emotion appears to spread through proximity. It's contagious, like light reflected through glass. Exposure to it has caused a measurable disturbance in my neural equilibrium. But despite every attempt to suppress it, I find myself unwilling to resist. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the words glowing on her screen, and whispered, "What is happening to me?" By the next cycle, the entire ship seemed to have shifted around her. Every sound, every movement felt amplified. The sterile white corridors felt suffocating. The other scientists spoke in their usual monotone, but to her it sounded hollow. They spoke of control, of purity, of the superiority of logic, and for the first time she felt disgusted by it. How could she have believed that this emotionless existence was perfection? It was cold, empty, a galaxy of equations with no heartbeat. When she entered the human observation room again, she found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching a holographic projection of Earth's oceans. The blue waves shimmered in the air, rolling endlessly, sunlight flickering across their surface. "I requested this," he said without looking at her. "Needed to see home again, even if it's just data." She stood behind him, transfixed by the hologram. "It's chaotic," she said softly. "Unpredictable. Beautiful, though," he replied, glancing at her. "Sometimes the best things are." She stepped closer, the simulated wind brushing across her face. "Your world breathes," she whispered. "It feels alive." Ethan smiled faintly. "It is. Everything on Earth moves and changes, even when you don't notice. That's what keeps it alive. That's what keeps us human." Lyra watched the light of the ocean dance across his face and felt something deep within her stir. "Your people, they fear the dark, the unknown. And yet you seek it." Ethan looked up at her, his expression soft but serious. "Fear isn't the opposite of courage, Doctor. It's part of it. You can't be brave without being scared first." She blinked slowly, processing the thought. "My kind eliminated fear centuries ago," she said. "We thought it was progress." Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "Maybe that's why you lost something important. Fear reminds us that we care about what we might lose." The words sank into her like a spark into ice. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the hologram, where waves crashed silently against invisible shores. Her reflection shimmered in the projection beside his, two forms from different worlds standing in the glow of a planet neither of them could touch. Days later, during another observation session, something unexpected happened. The power systems of the Kareth suffered a brief surge while Ethan was inside the scanning chamber. The ship's artificial gravity faltered, throwing equipment and data pads into the air. Without hesitation, Lyra rushed into the chamber, pulling him away from the sparking machinery. Her fingers dug into his arm, the heat of his skin startling her. "You could have been hurt," she said sharply, her voice breaking with something that sounded alarmingly close to panic. Ethan blinked in surprise, half smiling even as alarms blared. "You sound worried." "You are my subject," she replied quickly, though her voice trembled. "It is my responsibility to—" "No," he interrupted softly. "That's not what this is." She froze. For a moment, neither spoke. The lights flickered, and in that half-darkness, their faces were inches apart. His breath brushed against her skin, warm and human, and her pulse responded instantly, glowing bright beneath her collarbone. Her breath hitched. "Your physiology," she whispered. "It changes when I am close." He smiled faintly. "So does yours." When the systems finally stabilized, she retreated, shaken. The others arrived soon after, restoring order to the lab, but Lyra could barely hear them. Her mind raced, replaying the sensation of his warmth, the sound of his voice, the way her body had reacted beyond her control. Later that night, she stood before the mirror in her quarters, studying the soft light beneath her skin. It glowed irregularly now, a living pulse that matched the human heartbeat she'd felt. She tried to will it away, but it remained. Her reflection stared back, unfamiliar, almost fragile. For the first time, she wondered if the Elorian pursuit of perfection had stolen more from them than it had given. Perfection had no warmth, no laughter, no love, and as much as her mind rebelled against the thought, her body told her the truth. Ethan had changed her. When the Council's envoy sent a transmission days later, Lyra felt a dread she couldn't explain. The message was short and cold. "Report on human specimen interaction. Emotional contamination suspected. Prepare for reassignment." She sat in silence long after the screen went dark. They knew. The Council knew she'd crossed the invisible line between study and feeling. She should have been afraid, but what she felt was something else. Defiance. She looked toward the lab where Ethan's quarters glowed faintly through the ship's dim lights. She knew she had to see him one last time, even if it meant everything she'd built would come crashing down. When she entered his chamber, he looked up immediately, sensing her turmoil. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then said, "They know. The Council. They're recalling me." He frowned. "Because of me?" She shook her head slowly. "Because of us." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Ethan rose from his seat, his expression calm but resolute. "Then don't go," he said. Her chest tightened painfully. "If I disobey, they'll destroy me. And if you obey," he said softly, "you'll destroy yourself." She stood there, trembling, as the truth of his words settled in. And for the first time in her life, she made a choice not guided by logic or law but by feeling. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and whispered, "Then let them come." Outside, the stars drifted silently by, witnesses to something far greater than science could ever measure. The first heartbeat of love in a world that had forgotten how to feel. The corridors of the Kareth seemed quieter after that night, as if the ship itself sensed the forbidden current running through its cold metallic veins. Lyra walked those corridors with her head lowered, aware that every security camera and every motion sensor was watching her. The Council's presence loomed over the vessel now. She could feel it in the encrypted messages transmitted through the core relay, in the clipped tones of her colleagues who avoided her gaze. But despite the fear pressing against her chest, she felt something stronger beneath it, something dangerously alive. Every thought, Every breath carried his name. Ethan, the human who smiled in the face of rules, who laughed at machines that treated emotions as flaws. He had infected her world like a virus, and she no longer wished to be cured. That evening, the ship passed through the shimmer of a nebula, its faint light filtering through the viewport in soft pinks and blues. Lyra stood there alone, her reflection glowing faintly in the glass, her mind torn between duty and desire. For so long she had believed her people's truth, that emotion was weakness, that love was chaos, that perfection came from silence. Yet now she understood how hollow that perfection had been. Ethan had given her something no algorithm or archive could replicate. A heartbeat that wasn't just rhythm, but meaning. She was lost in that thought when the door slid open behind her. "You shouldn't be here," she said without turning, recognizing his footsteps instantly. "Neither should you," Ethan replied, his tone soft but defiant. He moved beside her, gazing at the same stars. "They've sent another message, haven't they?" She nodded slowly. "The council ship will arrive in less than 2 rotations. They'll remove you from the vessel, erase my data, and recondition me." His jaw tightened. "Erase you? Like you're a file?" She looked at him then, her luminous eyes full of quiet sorrow. "To them, that's all I am now, a corrupted unit. My emotions are a malfunction." He stepped closer, his voice steady despite the storm building between them. "Then run. With me." The simplicity of the suggestion made her laugh softly, though there was no humor in it. "Run where, Ethan? Every world within council reach is bound by their laws. Every system, every port, every channel monitored. There's always somewhere," he said. "You just have to believe it exists before you can find it." She looked at him, her lips parting as if to argue, but she couldn't. His words struck something deep inside her, something her kind had buried long ago, the human idea of faith. A belief without logic, a hope without proof. "You truly think there's a place for us?" she asked. "A world where an Elorian and a human can exist without chains?" Ethan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried pain and promise all at once. "If there isn't, then we'll make one." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the nebula's light painting them in color. Her hand lifted slowly, trembling, until her fingers brushed against his. The contact sent a surge of warmth through her body, the glow beneath her skin intensifying. She could feel his pulse beneath his skin, quick and strong, and for the first time she realized that her light responded not to data, but to him. "You see," he whispered, his breath brushing her ear. "Even your body disagrees with their laws." She let out a quiet, shaky laugh, one that melted into something almost like a sob. "You're reckless," she said. "You're everything they warned us about." "And you're everything they fear," he replied, "because they can't control what they don't understand." The space between them vanished then, and for one perfect, silent moment, she forgot the council, the laws, the consequences. She reached for him, and he met her halfway. The touch wasn't violent or desperate. It was quiet, reverent, the meeting of 2 impossible worlds. The glow from her skin spread around them like soft dawn light, and he felt it seep into his bones, warmth and electricity all at once. It was as though the universe itself had paused to watch. Afterward, she stood in the dim glow of the chamber, her breathing unsteady, her thoughts fractured by the weight of what had just happened. "You've ruined me," she whispered, though there was a faint smile on her lips. "No," he said quietly, brushing a strand of her silver-white hair from her face. "I just reminded you that you were alive." Her eyes shimmered, both in light and tears. "You don't understand what the council will do if they find out." "Then don't let them," he said, but she shook her head. "It's not that simple. The Elorian mind is linked to the ship's network. Every emotion I feel, every reaction, registers in the system. They'll see it. They already know." He looked at her with a mix of pity and admiration. "Then you'll have to choose," he said softly. "Stay perfect or stay real." That choice haunted her long after he'd fallen asleep in the corner of the lab, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. She sat at her console, the faint hum of the ship surrounding her, and accessed the central network. The data readings confirmed what she feared. Her neural patterns had diverged sharply from standard Elorian metrics. Emotional instability, the Council would call it. Contamination. But as she stared at the readings, she couldn't bring herself to erase them. Instead, she encrypted them, hiding them deep within the ship's archives under a false experiment log titled Subject 9, Behavioral Adaptation Under Human Influence. It was the only way to protect what she had become. Her hands trembled as she logged out, the final line of her entry still glowing on the screen. Emotion is not weakness. It is evolution. 2 hours later, the alarm sounded. The ship jolted violently as a massive shadow passed across the viewport. The Council's flagship had arrived early. Its dark metallic hull blotted out the stars, and the ship's automated voice announced, "Galactic Authority vessel approaching. All crew prepare for inspection." Lyra froze. She hadn't expected them so soon. Panic flared in her chest as she rushed to Ethan's side. He was already awake, eyes sharp. "They're here," she said breathlessly. "You have to hide." "Where?" he demanded. "There's no time." She looked around desperately, then pressed her hand against the wall panel. It shimmered open, revealing a small maintenance crawl space. "Inside," she said. "Don't move until I come for you." He caught her wrist before climbing in. "Lyra, if they find out, they'll—" "I know," she said softly, cutting him off. "But I won't let them." He hesitated, then nodded, climbing inside as the panel sealed behind him. The door to the lab slid open just seconds later, and a group of Elorian officers entered, their armor gleaming like liquid glass. At their center stood an overseer, his eyes cold and unblinking. "Dr. Thane," he said, "we've received reports of emotional deviation in your neural logs. You will submit for evaluation." She kept her expression neutral, her voice calm. "Of course, Overseer. My data is available for your review." He stepped forward, scanning the room with suspicion. "And the human specimen?" "Resting," she said smoothly. "In stasis." The Overseer's gaze lingered on the sealed door, then shifted back to her. "You've been observed exceeding your authorized interaction limits. Explain yourself." "Prolonged exposure to human emotion has measurable effects," she replied, reciting her lie like a scientist reading a formula. Further observation was necessary for accuracy. The Overseer stared at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Continue your research," he said. "But remember, Doctor, your purpose is to study emotion, not to feel it." As they turned to leave, she stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. Only when the door slid shut did she exhale, the sound breaking into a quiet sob. She pressed her palm against the wall where Ethan hid, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not over," she said. "Not yet." Behind the panel, he closed his eyes and whispered back through the darkness, "I know." That night, as the Council's ship loomed like a shadow across the stars, the Kareth drifted in silence. Lyra sat by the viewport, staring out into the endless black, knowing that their time was running out. She had crossed the line between logic and love, between control and chaos, and there was no turning back. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what would come next. She had chosen to feel, and that, she realized, was the most human act of all. The Council ship's presence hung over the Kareth like a silent threat, its dark hull blotting out the starlight and reminding everyone aboard that logic ruled the galaxy, and disobedience had no refuge. The corridors buzzed with tension, the crew moving with mechanical precision, eyes averted, voices hushed. Lyra walked among them like a ghost, her composure perfect on the outside but her mind a storm of fear and determination. Inside her chest, the warmth that had once felt like a small spark now burned like a sun, refusing to die. She had hidden Ethan for 2 rotations already, keeping him alive on stolen nutrient packs and the faint glow of hope, but she knew it couldn't last. The Council inspectors were thorough. They would scan every corridor, every compartment, and if they found him, her heart clenched at the thought. She wasn't supposed to have a heart that could do that, wasn't supposed to feel anything beyond duty. But every time she remembered his smile, his voice, the way he said her name, it broke her programming all over again. That evening, she met with her commanding officer in the central briefing chamber, pretending to carry on her duties as if nothing had changed. The overseer stood before the massive viewport, his back to her, the faint reflection of the council's ship glimmering in the glass. "Dr. Thane," he began coldly, "you understand the gravity of your position. Elorian scientists are not permitted to form attachments to study subjects. Such behavior compromises integrity." Lyra kept her voice even. "Yes, Overseer. Then explain this anomaly." He gestured, and the air shimmered as holographic data appeared. Her emotional readings, her fluctuating neural patterns, her increased heart rate at specific timestamps. All recorded, all undeniable. "You are showing consistent signs of contamination," he continued. "Your emotional index has risen above acceptable thresholds. That is no longer data, Doctor, it is disobedience." Lyra's jaw tightened. She forced herself to breathe evenly. "I can recalibrate," she said, her tone steady. "I'll undergo neural correction." The overseer turned toward her, his silver eyes narrowing. "You misunderstand," he said quietly. "This level of contamination cannot be corrected. It must be erased." The meaning sank into her like ice. Erasure. The Elorian solution for anything that could not be reasoned with. She kept her expression calm, even as the floor seemed to vanish beneath her. "When?" she asked. "Immediately," he said, his voice almost gentle. "The council vessel will extract you within the next cycle. Your data will be integrated, your consciousness purged of emotional corruption. You'll continue to serve. Clean, efficient, perfect once more." She bowed her head slightly. "As you command," she said, and turned to leave. But as she walked through the metallic corridor, the pulse of her light quickened beneath her skin, flickering in rhythm with her racing thoughts. She was running out of time. She had only one cycle left before they erased her, and Ethan would be found the moment they took her away. There was only one way out now. She had to escape the ship entirely. When she reached the lab, Ethan was waiting for her, emerging from the hidden panel like a shadow stepping into light. "I heard the alarms," he said. "What's happening?" She looked at him and for a long moment said nothing. Then her voice cracked as she whispered, "They're taking me. Tomorrow. They'll erase everything. My memories, my emotions, even you." His face hardened, eyes darkening. "Then we leave tonight." She shook her head. "There's nowhere to go. The Kareth is locked into the Council Fleet's command system. Every route is monitored, every signal traced. Then we'll find a way they can't predict," he said. "You're a scientist, Lyra. You've studied every part of this ship. You told me once that emotion leads to chaos, and that chaos breaks control. Maybe it's time you proved yourself wrong." She stared at him, speechless, the truth of his words cutting deeper than fear. Chaos. That was what she had once despised most. But maybe chaos was just another word for freedom. They spent the next hours in silence, working side by side. Ethan accessed the ship's maintenance controls while she rerouted the internal sensors to mimic empty corridors. Every keystroke was a risk, every moment a countdown. The plan was simple but desperate. They would use one of the old escape pods docked in the lower maintenance bay, one no one had used since the ship's retrofit. It wasn't built for interstellar travel, but it could hide them long enough to slip past the Council ship scanners. Lyra moved with calm precision, her every motion a defiance of fear. But inside, her thoughts were chaos. She was breaking everything she'd ever believed in. Her people, her training, herself. And yet, for the first time, she felt whole. By the time the final systems were ready, the ship's artificial dawn began to glow faintly through the corridor lights. "We have one chance," she said quietly. "Once we launch, the Council will detect the energy surge. We'll need to mask it with something larger." Ethan nodded, looking out the viewport. "Then we give them a distraction." He gestured toward the main reactor feed. "If we overload the containment field, That could destroy the ship, she said sharply. Or save us, he countered. Their eyes met, and in that look, everything passed between them. The fear, the hope, the love neither dared speak aloud. You're insane, she whispered. I learned from the best, he said with a small, crooked smile. The plan unfolded faster than either of them expected. Lyra uploaded false maintenance protocols into the ship's AI, creating a system lag that delayed all monitoring sensors. Ethan, his hands steady despite the stakes, accessed the reactor controls and began diverting excess power into the lower decks. Alarms began to hum softly through the halls, a low warning that the ship's systems were destabilizing. Crew members scrambled, unaware that the chaos was deliberate. Lyra watched the timer count down, her pulse matching its rhythm. Now, she said, grabbing Ethan's hand. They ran through the corridor, the world around them flickering with lights and the echo of metallic footsteps. Somewhere behind them, the overseer's voice crackled through the comm system. Containment breach detected. Secure all sections. Locate Dr. Thane immediately. They reached the maintenance bay just as the first wave of guards entered the upper decks. Lyra slammed her hand against the control panel, and the old pod's hatch hissed open, the smell of dust and machine oil filling the air. It's still functional, she said breathlessly. Barely. Ethan climbed inside, pulling her after him. Then it'll do. As the hatch sealed, the world outside filled with red lights and the sound of the ship's alarms reaching a fever pitch. The pod systems hummed to life, old but stubborn, like the humans who built them centuries ago. Lyra entered the manual launch sequence, her fingers trembling. Once we fire, they'll trace us. Not if we're gone before they realize where to look, he said. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the control. If this fails, Ethan, then at least we'll fail together, he said quietly. That silenced her. She pressed the button. The pod shuddered violently, breaking free from the careth with a roar that reverberated through her chest. The artificial gravity flickered, and for a moment they were weightless, two fugitives suspended between death and freedom. Through the small viewport, she saw the ship shrinking behind them, its sleek body lit by the pulsing red of its own alarms. Then, in the distance, the reactor overloaded just as planned, releasing a blinding burst of light that swallowed the ship's silhouette. The shockwave hit the pod a moment later, sending it spinning through the void. Alarms screamed inside, sparks flying as the system overloaded. Ethan reached for her, gripping her hand tightly. Hold on, he shouted. The world became a blur of light and sound, and then silence. When she opened her eyes again, the pod was drifting. The stars outside were steady now, scattered like shards of glass across the darkness. The systems flickered weakly, the air thin but breathable. They had escaped. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt tears gather in her eyes. Not from pain, but from the impossible beauty of it. We're alive, she whispered. Ethan smiled wearily. Yeah, he said softly. Guess the universe isn't done with us yet. She leaned back against the cold metal wall, her glowing skin dimming as exhaustion washed over her. What happens now? She asked. He turned toward her, his expression gentle. Now, he said. Now we find somewhere to start over. She looked at him for a long moment, the silence between them filled with the hum of the pod's failing engines. And for the first time, she believed him. Outside, the wreckage of the careth drifted silently, the council's ship scanning the void in vain. Somewhere, hidden among the stars, two heartbeats pulsed in defiance of everything the galaxy believed impossible. A human and an alien who had proven that even in a universe built on control, emotion could rewrite destiny. The escape pod drifted through the dark like a dying ember, its metal skin scorched and trembling, lights flickering with the last whispers of power. The hum of the engines had long faded into silence, replaced only by the steady, fragile rhythm of two heartbeats, one human, one alien, echoing in the hollow chamber. Lyra sat across from Ethan, her back against the curved wall, her luminous veins dim and flickering like a candle fighting against the void. They had no destination plotted, no working navigation system, only the stars surrounding them in an infinite sea of cold light. Yet, for the first time in her existence, she wasn't afraid of uncertainty. She had lived her entire life under the illusion of control, trained to calculate every outcome, to remove every variable of chaos. But sitting there beside him, lost and exhausted, she realized that chaos was not destruction. It was life. Ethan was quiet, staring out the viewport where the glow of the nearby nebula washed across his face in soft hues of violet and blue. His lips were cracked, his eyes weary, but when he turned toward her, he smiled that same small, human smile that had unraveled her entire world. "We made it," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. Lyra nodded slowly. "For now," she said, her voice softer, heavier with exhaustion. "The Council will search. They always do. Then we'll stay ahead of them," he said simply, as if survival were as easy as breathing. She watched him for a long time, studying the lines on his face, the faint scars that marked the passage of human struggle, each one a story of endurance. Her kind had erased such imperfections long ago, but now she saw beauty in them. Every mark was proof of something her species had forgotten: resilience. "Your kind fights even when logic says there's no hope," she said quietly. "It's not logic that keeps us alive," he replied. "It's love." The word hung in the air like gravity, pulling at something deep inside her. Love. It was a term she had studied in thousands of human texts, classified as a biochemical response, an evolutionary mechanism to ensure the continuation of species. But sitting here, watching the rise and fall of his chest, hearing the faint warmth in his voice, she realized how inadequate those definitions were. Love wasn't a calculation, it was surrender. "Love," she repeated softly, testing the sound of it like a language newly learned. "It hurts." Ethan chuckled weakly. "Yeah," he said. "It does that too." Her luminous skin flickered faintly, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the sound of his breathing. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing his hand. "Humans are strange," she murmured. "You destroy everything you touch, and yet, somehow, you make it beautiful again." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's what being human means. We break things, then we love enough to fix them." Time blurred after that. Hours, maybe days, passed as the pod floated through the emptiness. Their food supply dwindled. The oxygen filters strained. Sleep came in fragments. Lyra spent long hours watching Ethan as he drifted in and out of consciousness, his strength fading. She tried to remain logical, to focus on repairing what little she could, but every sound of his labored breathing tore at her composure. She had risked everything to save him, and now, as the air thinned and his skin grew pale, she feared she might lose him anyway. "Stay awake," she whispered one night, her voice trembling as she shook him gently. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and distant. "I'm here," he said weakly. "I'm not going anywhere." But she saw the truth in his fading expression. The universe had never been kind to hope. Tears she didn't understand welled in her eyes. Her species didn't cry, but then again, she wasn't entirely Elorian anymore. She moved to the control panel, her hands trembling as she worked. "I can reroute power to the life support system," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it to him or to herself. Ethan forced a faint smile. "You'll burn out the rest of the pod doing that." "Then I'll burn it," she whispered fiercely. "I won't lose you." She pressed her glowing palm against the console, and the circuits responded instantly. Light surged through her veins, the pod flickering to life as if feeding on her energy. The hum returned, low but steady, and the oxygen levels began to rise. Her body trembled violently, the glow in her chest pulsing brighter until it filled the pod with a warm blue light. Ethan tried to stop her, reaching for her hand, but she only smiled through her tears. "You taught me this," she said softly. "To feel, to fight, to believe in something illogical." The light spread outward, wrapping around them both like a heartbeat echoing through the void. When the glow finally faded, she slumped to the floor, her breathing shallow but steady. The pod systems stabilized. Ethan sat up slowly, staring at her in disbelief. "Lyra," he said, his voice breaking, "what did you do?" She opened her eyes, the light beneath her skin dim but still alive. "I gave it what it needed," she said weakly. "A little chaos." He laughed quietly, tears welling in his eyes as he gathered her in his arms. "You're insane," he said softly. "I learned from the best," she whispered, echoing his words from before. Outside, through the viewport, the stars began to shift. The pod's sensors flickered, detecting a gravitational field pulling them gently toward an uncharted planet. A small blue-green sphere glowing faintly in the distance. "We're being pulled in," Ethan said, checking the instruments. "It's habitable." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with wonder. "Then maybe," she whispered, "the universe hasn't given up on us after all." The pod descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, shaking violently before crashing into a soft expanse of sand. When the hatch finally opened, light flooded in, warm, golden, alive. The air smelled of rain and earth, the sound of wind carrying across endless fields of green. Lyra stepped out first, her bare feet sinking into the soil. The ground was soft, alive with energy. Ethan followed her, squinting against the brightness. "We did it," he murmured. "We're free." She turned toward him, her luminous eyes reflecting the sky. "Free," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "This place, it feels familiar. Maybe it's been waiting for us," he said, smiling faintly. She glanced around, her fingers brushing the leaves of a strange plant that pulsed faintly with light. "It's growing," she whispered, "responding to us. Maybe life just needed someone to believe in it again," Ethan said softly. She looked at him, her expression full of quiet awe. "Then we'll give it that." Days turned into weeks as they built a small shelter by the shore, using fragments of the escape pod and what nature offered. The days were warm, the nights filled with soft luminescence from the planet's flora. They survived on gathered fruit and water filtered from a nearby spring. And though the silence of the stars stretched endlessly above, neither of them felt alone. Sometimes, when the wind moved through the tall grass, it sounded almost like a whisper, a voice older than time, humming with the memory of every choice that had led them here. Lyra would pause, closing her eyes, and hear the echo of her past life. The lab, the council, the cold perfection of logic, and feel no regret. She had chosen imperfection, and in it, she had found everything she was missing. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Ethan sat beside her on the beach. The waves lapped gently at their feet, each one glowing faintly in the twilight. "Do you ever wonder if they'll find us?" he asked quietly. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "They might," she said. "But even if they do, they'll never understand what we found here." "What's that?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A reason." The waves glowed brighter for a moment, and somewhere above, a meteor streaked across the sky like a silver flame. "Humans call that a shooting star," Ethan murmured. "You're supposed to make a wish." She tilted her head, intrigued. "A wish? Something you want that feels impossible," he said. She thought for a long moment, her glowing eyes fixed on the falling light. "Then I wish," she whispered, "for a galaxy that remembers what it means to feel." Ethan smiled, wrapping an arm around her as they watched the sky. "Careful," he said softly. "That sounds like rebellion." "No," she replied, her voice like a song carried by the sea. "That sounds like hope." And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the council's ships scanned empty skies, searching for what they would never find. Because what had escaped them wasn't just a human and an alien. It was the one thing they could never contain. Humanity's heart had crossed the stars, and now it beat in two forms, sitting beneath a new sky, holding hands beneath the light of a universe that had finally learned how to love again. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more cinematic HFY sci-fi tales, where love, humanity, and the stars are never truly out of reach.